Yo, what is up ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's Zero here, bringing you a review of Nintendo's newest IP, ARMS. So now, one of the most important things in a fighting game is its cast of characters, and while ARMS does not necessarily have the largest selection of characters to choose from, it doesn't necessarily detract from the game as a whole, largely because this means that Nintendo has been able to spend a little more time perfecting each character's design and making them really stand out. There's no clone here, every character feels unique, and they each have their own special abilities that really make the game what it is. Not to mention, each character has a pretty, rockin' theme song. I really enjoy the soundtrack of ARMS. That's one of the things that it does really well. But now, the most important part of any fighter is its gameplay. So how does ARMS compare to others of its kind? Well, as always, Nintendo tries to opt for a more non-traditional control scheme, and this involves, you would have guessed it, motion controls. Punching left or right with Joy-Con initiates a punch in the game, and moving around is done by tilting the Joy-Cons left or right. And this is okay for earlier difficulties, but as fights get more hectic and the difficulty increases, it becomes a lot harder to do precision dodging and moving in order to actually defeat enemies. Thankfully, you don't have to use this kind of control, as Nintendo has also provided the option of using traditional layouts, such as using your Joy-Cons with the controller adapter, or using it straight up with the Switch console itself. And personally, I think that's the best way to play the game. And while it's still, a bit awkward, and there's kind of a steep learning curve, it's not that bad, really. The only problem I have with it is that Nintendo does not have the option to change the button mapping as it did in like Smash 4, which I feel is something that's kind of box standard nowadays. I mean, I guess it's kind of nitpicky at the most. Finally, we have the game modes. As with any fighting game, we have a Grand Prix and a Versus, but we also have a party match where you can fight online for fun, ranked matches where you fight for your pride, online multiplayer, and local multiplayer. So I think Grand Prix is something we'll save for last, because it's kind of where you'll be spending most of your time, I feel. So in the meantime, we'll be taking a look at its other modes of gameplay. So the first game mode we'll be looking at is V-Ball, where you and your opponent duke it out to be the first to get 5 points in a simplified volleyball match. It's certainly one of the faster game modes in ARMS, but that's not entirely a bad thing, especially since it gets pretty hectic as you try to swing your arms around as quickly as possible to keep the ball from hitting the ground. But I think the tried and true method of beating this is simply to set it up with the grab and then spike it down as quickly as you can. Our next game mode is Hoops, which is, well, you'd have guessed it, basketball. In this game mode, you try your best to grab your opponents and dunk them into the hoop for points. First to 10 wins, and this is also another pretty enjoyable game mode. I don't know how necessarily they calculate whether or not you'll make it into the hoop. I feel like I miss way more than I should. But it's, again, something quick and easy to play if you're not really into the whole fighting thing at the moment. Finally, the last of the non-fighting game modes is Skill Shot, and personally, this is my least favorite of the bunch. I absolutely do not like playing it, and largely because it's basically you against the opponent, and each of you try to hit as many targets in order as you can. I'm terrible at it. I get hit way too often, and I don't score as many points as I can because I cannot aim for the life of me. So I try to avoid it as best I can. But for those more skilled players, I guess, you might actually enjoy this because it does feel satisfying to rack up a really high score against your opponent. Now, if you want to fight with a friend, ARMS also has a team fight mode where you're basically strapped to your partner and go up against another pair of opponents. This mode is alright, and it can actually be pretty difficult at times, since being strapped to your partner means anything that happens to you happens to them, and vice versa. Likewise, there's also friendly fire, so be careful where you're aiming those punches. And if your partner gets knocked out, it becomes an uphill battle as you try to beat 2 opponents while simultaneously dragging around your knocked out partner. Now ARMS also has a 1-on-100 mode too, and it's a lot like the one in Smash where you basically go up against a lot of CPUs that are basically knocked out with one punch! And if you get to the end, you actually get to fight a surprise boss. But I'll talk about him a little bit later. But for now, we'll cover the Grand Prix. And honestly, This is the meat and potatoes of the game. In this mode, you basically choose your character and progress through, I guess, what's a simplified storyline of you basically wanting to be the best, I guess? Actually, one of the downsides of this game is that there's actually very little backstory to your character, and not a whole lot of story, which is an improvement that could be made. Nonetheless, as you progress, you fight every character in the roster, and after every 3 matches, they toss in one of those minigames we covered earlier as a way of spicing things up. And it's also really nice as a bit of a refresher, so you don't get too burnt out on the fighting. At the end, you go up against the one and only Max Brass, the current champion of ARMS. He's not particularly difficult, and after a little bit of patience, you can take him out pretty easily, largely because he has a pretty large hitbox, and he's a bit slow. But that's not all. If you're playing on difficulty 4, you'll come up against the secret boss, Headlock, who is also the boss of the 1-on-100. And this is where it truly gets difficult. Like, I mean, really difficult. The guy's got like 6 arms, which makes it really difficult to dodge his attacks. And while his super move is fairly easy to dodge, if it hits you, it does so much damage. I spent half an hour trying to beat him for this review, and that's after I've spent a long time actually playing the game, and he's still pretty difficult. Or I just really suck. Actually, it's probably the latter. But with a lot of perseverance and a lot of patience, you can beat him, and when you do, you get a little nice end credits, and you unlock ranked mode, where you can truly finally test your skills against other competitors online. So now, you've gone through the minigames, you've done the versus, you've done the tag teaming, you've done the 1-on-100, and you've done the Grand Prix. What do you get out of all of this? Well, every time you win a match, you get a set amount of coins, and with this in-game currency, you can purchase new fists for your character. But here's the catch, it's not as easy as going into a store and selecting out the one that you like. Nah, you gotta work for it. Depending on how many coins you use, you can purchase a set amount of times to basically go into a punching range, where you hit targets and presents that fly by in order to get new gloves for your character. And while it's kinda random, it's pretty heavily weighted towards the character that you're currently playing as. These arms can do a variety of different elemental attacks, from fire to electricity that can stun your opponents, or ice that freezes them in place. And it provides a nice touch of customization to your character. You can really, find a combination that really works for you. And that's all there really is to ARMS. To be honest, there's not a whole lot of content to go around. I know that Nintendo is planning to release Max Brass as another character on the roster later on as DLC, and hopefully they'll have a few more down the line. But it's really hard to form a connection with these characters beyond looks. It would have been nice in the Grand Prix to see a little more motivation as to why they're in the tournament in the first place. For example, maybe if Min Min is joining the tournament because she needs the grand prize money for her family's noodle house. Or maybe Ninjara is trying to beat this tournament as sort of a way of graduating from his ninja college. These little things would have added a lot more to the game. So for those of you who are sort of on the fence about buying ARMS, I would say, you know what, maybe wait for a price drop. And if you do get it, I definitely recommend you don't use the motion controls. It's too finicky to move around in later difficulties. If you start with the controller right off the bat, you'll have a better time. So at the end of the day, Nintendo's newest IP, in my opinion, is basically, it's alright. It's average. I enjoy it for the most part, but there's not a lot for me to come back to. Hopefully Nintendo will step up their game and add a lot more content with their sequel, Legs. But until then, thank you all so very much for watching. Leave a comment down below about your opinions on the game. After all, this is really just my opinion. And if you enjoyed the content, it would be greatly appreciated if you liked, subscribed, and shared the video to your friends. It helps our channel grow, and it gives you new content to watch. And as always, thank you so very much for watching my very first review, and I hope you have a stellar day.